one way ExxonMobil is helping industrial plants be more like
resume. You're hiring a person. That's why we offer tools to give you a deeper sense of the people behind.
Others said they might be onto something and trying to do the same, but they can't because.
Hello and welcome back to Bookish. Today I wanted to do my review or my discussion of Remembrance of Things Past by Marcel Proust. I read the first two volumes of this, Swan's Way and Within a Budding Grove, for March of the Mammoths, and I think I finally got my thoughts collected well enough to talk about it. By the way, Amy from the Dusty Bookshelf has been reading this as well, and she's done some really great videos. I'll leave a link to the first one of her videos about Remembrance of Things Past down below. You should go check out those if you're interested in Proust as well. She's probably a lot more coherent than I'm about to be. At any rate, I did read the first two volumes of Remembrance of Things Past for the March of the Mammoths. And essentially what we have in the two volumes I read is a coming-of-age story for the unnamed narrator, who we kind of follow from his family's, or from his aunt, his wealthy aunt's home in the provincial city of Cambrai to Paris to a beachside community where he goes on vacation in the second volume. So essentially, like I said, it's a coming-of-age story of the narrator, and a couple of things become quickly clear that I think Remembrance of Things Past is going to be somewhat obsessed with. One is with the nature of French social class and the incredibly complex levels that exist within French society. You know, who got invited to whose party, and you know, who could call on who, and who was in the upper levels of French society. This is kind of an obsession with the author, and while I'm not exactly sure where he's going with it, which I'll talk about a little bit later, it does seem to be something that was fixed in Proust's mind, something that was an important part of this story. Now, the unnamed narrator is generally considered to be a stand-in for Proust himself, and many people consider the novels to be somewhat autobiographical. So the second thing I think the two volumes I read about are how the narrator is more or less obsessed with women. Essentially, the narrator moves from kind of an almost overwhelming love and affection for one woman to another. His mother, his grandmother, a young woman he meets named Gilberte, the wife of a family friend, essentially any farm girl or girl he sees out in the country while on a carriage ride or on a train, a group of women, a group of young ladies that he meets while he's on vacation with his grandmother, just from one girl to another. And this, I think, is really one of the most accurate representations of that kind of adolescent feeling I think that a lot of young men experience, where they just kind of go from one love and obsession to another. And so that was really striking to me, and somewhat, you know, I thought very true to my own life. Maybe not the obsession with the mother and the grandmother so much, but this kind of, you know, just essentially bouncing from one romantic thought, one romantic possibility to another.
That's what I'm talking about. All right, darling. Thank you.
Okay, so the first volume I read, or the first volume in this book, is called Swan's Way, and it's named after a family friend of the narrator's family who comes to their house in Cambrai from time to time. Unbeknownst to the narrator's family, at least initially, Swan moves in the highest levels of French society. He's a friend of princes, he's invited to the homes of princesses, and you know, these people all just think he's really charming, and he really is a member of French high society. But ironically, the narrator's parents and family, along with French society, will not admit his wife to their home because his wife was a woman of somewhat low reputation, and based on what the book describes, at the time period in which she lived, certainly her reputation was less than sterling. So the volume Swan's Way really goes into some depth about Swan's love affair with this woman named Odette, who he does eventually marry. Sorry, spoiler alert. Who he does eventually marry, and how, you know, at first when he meets her, he's not attracted to her. He doesn't think she's that great, and then she slowly becomes an obsession for him. He becomes so overwhelmingly in love with her that he ignores obvious signs that she is cheating on him with any number of men. He determines that he's going to break it off with her, and then in the end, we find out that he has in fact married her. Interestingly, and one of the things that I'll kind of get to later, is that when the narrator meets Swan's daughter, Gilbert, I think that's how you pronounce her name. When he meets Swan's daughter, he falls in love with her, and his relationship with Swan's daughter mirrors Swan's relationship with his wife in any number of ways, which I find is really interesting. By the end of Swan's Way, in the beginning of Within a Budding Grove, he's kind of managed to break free of that, perhaps in a way that Swan didn't. And so I found that interesting, and there are a number of parallels, I think, that run through these first two volumes that I find interesting.
All week that missed the fairway on the 100 off on the last hole.
And I absolutely love this guy. He got reprimanded.
The 38th president of the PGA of America has to say about golf, the untapped market.
This book is a must-read. Without a...
So there are a couple of things in the two volumes of Remembrance of Things Past that I read that surprised me. Number one is a relatively frank dealing with homosexuality that you can find here. Particularly, you know, Proust seems to be somewhat obsessed with lesbians, and there is a lesbian couple who he kind of spies on to a certain extent. One of the things which made Odette, Swan's future wife's reputation so bad was the idea that she had engaged in lesbian affairs, and in fact, you know, Odette appears to be bisexual in some ways in the book. I found that to be a surprise. That's not one of those things I expected. And then there's also kind of a strange encounter that the narrator himself has with a man who's a member of a very well-to-do high society family, which seems to indicate that this man has taken a sexual interest in the narrator as well, and is frustrated by the narrator's naivete about what exactly is going on. So I found that to be surprising. I also found it somewhat surprising that Proust can be funny. This is not something I expected. So early on in the book, by early on I mean page 135, Proust describes a character that his family were friends with in Cambrai in kind of a funny way. And in this kind of funny way, he reveals something about him. So I'm going to read that passage to you. Legrandin's face wore an expression of extraordinary zeal and animation. He made a deep bow with a subsidiary backward movement, which brought his shoulders sharply up into position behind the starting point, a gesture in which he must have been trained by the husband of his sister, Madame Cambremer. This rapid straightening up caused a sort of tense muscular wave to ripple over Legrandin's rump, which I had not supposed to be so fleshy. I cannot say why, but this undulation of pure matter, this wholly carnal fluency devoid of spiritual significance, this wave lashed into a tempest by an obsequious alacrity of the basest sort, awoke my mind suddenly to the possibility of a Legrandin altogether different from the one we knew. So I just think this is just brilliant and funny, and the way he describes the character's buttocks rippling in all the ways in which he kind of piles image upon image in that is a characteristic of Proust's writing, and I think also really funny, and it's also kind of telling about the narrator's ideas about social class and people who are a little grasping, people who are obsequious of the class above them. So there's no denying that Remembrance of Things Past is tough reading. There are long sentences. The passage I read you, I think, is 2 sentences long, with at least one semicolon in the second sentence. And these long passages and sentences are part of really long paragraphs where there are not a lot of page breaks, and there are not a lot of places for the eye or the mind to rest. This is in part why it was challenging reading the 30 pages a day that I did for March of the Mammoths. In addition to that, the book is not strictly told chronologically. A lot of times we learn things that are about events that are going to happen in the future while the narrator is narrating events from the past. So it is a stream of consciousness novel, but unlike Faulkner in The Sound and the Fury, or unlike Joyce in Ulysses, it's kind of a stream of consciousness remembrance. And so you really get the feeling that you're inside Proust's mind as he's remembering all these things and kind of filing things into order, and things are kind of fitting into place, and you get the feeling that in reading them that the narrator is working his own way through these thoughts and memories just as we are. So that can be challenging reading, and that can be difficult reading, and it was at times a bit of a slog to get through all of that. Okay, so in terms of plot, other than, the narrator's obsession and romantic interest in various women, the plot of the novel essentially is revealed, I think, in kind of an indirect way, and it's one of those things which I found in Proust that you have to really be paying attention to what he's doing. When you're reading along, oftentimes it just feels like there are just pages of description about people and places and things that can't possibly matter, and it becomes kind of mind-numbing, and you're reading along, and sometimes I found myself just looking at the words and things not really resonating with me at all, like I was just trying to get through those 30 pages, and it was really difficult. And then all of a sudden there are these really direct passages from Proust in which all of a sudden things start to fall into place, and you start to understand, hey, I think I know what's going on, and wow, now I understand why this character thinks that way, or now I understand this, and now I understand what the narrator's talking about, and now I understand how I think what Proust thinks about art, or what Proust thinks about his own writing, or what Proust thinks about anything, and it all just kind of almost like magically falls into place, and you get this real appreciation for Proust's genius. How did he do all that? How does he keep track of all those different lines and thoughts and images to bring them back together so that you have some kind of a coherent meaning at some point? It's kind of like Dickens at his best, I think, with the really big plots like in Bleak House and all the characters and fitting them back in together. Only this is done almost on a psychological level. And again, where you feel like you're inside the narrator's mind.
2019, and Tony Finau leading by 2 shots, 11 under par.
Is in, it's going to skirt past it to the right, and it will slide past some 4 feet for Phil.
So when I got to the end of these 2 volumes, Remembrance of Things Past, 2 things occurred to me. Number one, I think I detected what the unifying theme of the novel is, and it has to do with 2 different paths that his family used to take when they went on walks in Cambrai. One of those walks was a shorter, safer walk in which they got to walk under the shelter of trees, and in case it rained while they were out, they could always just shelter in the trees and wait for the rain to pass and stay dry. That way brought them past the property of Swann in Cambrai. The second way was the Guermantes way, and that was a much longer path, which took them across the property of kind of the top noble family of the Cambrai area, the Guermantes, who the narrator will meet later on when he's at this beachside community and become friends with some members of that family as well. But that's a much longer way, and there's no kind of safety or shelter. There's no place to shelter from the rain, and so his family only went that way on their walks when they were sure of the weather. But one of the other things that comes from that is that he describes in some detail is the difference in the view of Cambrai and the difference in going one way or the other. And he remarks on how different things are just by turning right or left out of the garden gate of his aunt's home. And I think that that's kind of what the novels are about. The narrator choosing Swann's way, maybe the shorter route, maybe the somewhat easier route, or the Guermantes way, which is not as safe and not as sure, that are going to lead him to, and would lead him to, a very different place and perhaps a very different perspective on the world. That's what I think. Now, you should know, there are 2,000 more pages of this. There are 2 more books this size and 4 more total volumes. So that's what I think right now, and it also occurred to me that unless I read the other 2,000 pages, I'm never going to know for sure. And reading 2,000 more pages of Proust is, at this point, really daunting. Anyway, I hope this gave some insight into my reading of Proust. And as always, thanks for watching. I look forward to seeing your comments in the comment section below.
One last settling of the feet. Charles,
That sounds great.
the orchestration by CDW. People who get it. Find out more at
Go with Justin Harding from South Africa. If you weren't with us for our Thursday, Friday coverage, I told you that Harding is mud. Turned right across the front of the hole, and he can't believe it. Put his right hand up back behind his white cap.